Yesterday we began looking at the colonization of the New World by England. We saw some of the things that attracted settlers. We saw some of the ways that the colonies were governed and some other things as well. Today we're going to begin centering in on New England and looking at particularly how that was settled. We're going to spend some time here because the people that settled New England have a great influence on the rest of our country. And the first colony in New England that we'll be looking at is Massachusetts. Now, in order to understand the settling of Massachusetts, we have to go back to the religious context of England. And in England, the church that was the dominant church, the one that was the state church in England, is called what? This is really easy. The Anglican Church, or the Church of England. Yes. So really easy. In England, the church that was dominant was the Church of England. Now that church was Protestant, but it had vestiges of Roman Catholicism in its rituals. Now, if we look at this chart, we can see how that came about. I'm going to quickly go through what transpired to bring about the fact that England became Protestant, but still retained a lot of Roman Catholicism in the way the church operated. All right, so first of all, we have Henry VII was King of England, and he had a son named Arthur, a daughter Margaret, a son Henry, and a daughter Mary. We're not concerned right now with Mary or Margaret. Arthur was the oldest, and he was supposed to be the next king. With that in mind, Henry VII arranged for his son Arthur to marry a Spanish princess to try to bring England and Spain together as allies. Her name was Catherine, and she was from Aragon. Unfortunately, after the marriage, before Henry VII died, Arthur died. That meant that his son Henry VIII, who had been training, was being educated to have a role in the church, the Roman Catholic Church in England, now he's the heir apparent. Now he's going to be the one that will come on the throne. Well, Henry VII didn't want to lose both the dowry that came with Catherine of Aragon and marrying Arthur, but didn't want to lose also the connection with Spain, that they're allies together. And so he married his other son, Henry VIII, to Catherine to keep that together. So Henry didn't have any choice in the matter. Well, I guess his brother Arthur didn't have much either. But in Henry's case, Catherine was already older. She was older than him, and wasn't very appealing to him either. So when Henry VII died, Henry VIII comes on the throne. He's married to Catherine of Aragon. Okay, so he's going to go with that. But Catherine doesn't seem to be able to produce the most important thing to a king, and that is a son, because he wants to have a son to carry on after him. And Catherine only produces a daughter, and her name was Mary. So eventually, Henry's eye was drawn to other ladies, and especially one by the name of Anne Boleyn. She became pregnant, and he was hoping that maybe she would produce the son that he wanted. And so that meant he had to get rid of Catherine of Aragon. Now the situation at that time was, in the Roman Catholic Church, is the Pope, if a person was influential enough, could declare a marriage as annulled, because divorce wasn't allowed in the Roman Catholic Church. But a marriage could be declared annulled, which means it never happened. Even though there's a child, even though all this stuff, but he could declare that marriage never was legal. That would free Henry then to marry Anne of Boleyn. So Henry had his top-notch religious advisors working on this and talking with the Pope and trying to get him to do this for him. But the Pope at the time was under heavy influence from the King of Spain. The King of Spain had control over the Pope, if you will, and the Pope was afraid of the King of Spain, so he wasn't going to do something to offend the King of Spain by allowing Henry VIII to get rid of his wife, Catherine of Aragon, who's from Spain. Are you following that? It's kind of like a soap opera. A nighttime drama. So the Pope refused. So Henry is so intent on getting rid of Catherine that he decides the only way to do it is to separate from the Roman Catholic Church, no longer be under the Pope, establish a Church of England, and King Henry would be the head of the church instead of the Pope. And then he could say, okay, this marriage is annulled, and I can marry Anne Boleyn, which is what he did. So Catherine of Aragon raises her daughter Mary on her own. Henry VIII marries Anne Boleyn. She also gave birth to a daughter named Elizabeth. So Henry became dissatisfied with her, and I won't run down through all his 6 wives. Very interesting, the 6 wives of Henry VIII. But eventually he has a wife. He does have a wife named Jane Seymour, who does give birth to a son, but she dies in childbirth. Anne Boleyn he had beheaded by that time, because she only gave him a daughter. So he goes through 6 wives. They all either are beheaded or divorced. Finally, the last one outlives him. But that's how the Church of England got started. It's because Henry VIII wanted to get rid of his wife. Yeah.
So did James Seymour give him a son? Mm-hmm. But didn't the son have a little sort of got released before
yeah. Good segue. So who follows Henry VIII when he dies? He lives a long life. He was pretty healthy. So when he died, well, here's Catherine of Aragon, and here's Anne Boleyn, here are his wives. Jane Seymour was the 3rd wife, and she gives birth to Edward. Then we have Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr. And you see Anne Boleyn gives birth to Elizabeth. All right, so there's the whole tree there. So when Henry VIII dies, they bypass, of course, his daughters and go to his son, who is Edward VI. Stephen?
Why did he had her? We had his wives.
Because that was easier than a divorce.
That's me.
He accused Anne Boleyn of treason against him because he accused her of having sexual relations with his uncle. And so when you do something against the king, that's treason. So that's an easy out, just off with their head. Okay, so Edward VI becomes king, but he's young, and as Michaela pointed out, rather sickly. So he doesn't live a long time. He dies while he's in his teens, if I remember correctly. And so now the nobles are left with, okay, who's going to succeed him? Well, there was at this point, the Church of England was basically the Roman Catholic Church with Henry as the head of it instead of the Pope. Basically, it was the same. But under Edward VI, his mother was a strong Protestant, and he brought in reforms to the Church of England, even as a young man, which changed the church into a Protestant church. Now they're following the doctrines of Martin Luther and John Calvin and others. And so the church changed. But of course, there were enough people, enough nobles in the country that liked the Roman Catholic Church that they wanted to bring it back. And so they decided to go with Henry's oldest daughter, who is Mary. Where is she? There. Let's see. Doesn't have, okay, right here, coming up this way. Catherine of Aragon had Mary. And who also married then Philip II, King of Spain, and he claimed to be King of Spain and England because he's married to Mary. Well, Mary is Roman Catholic. She was raised that way by her mother. Now she's going to swing the pendulum the other way and make the country Roman Catholic again. Well, in order to do that, she has to get rid of the Protestants, and so she just kills Protestant leaders. 30 in one day were burned at the stake. I saw there's a monument there that I saw commemorating that. So she killed so many Protestants that she got the nickname Bloody Mary. Thankfully, she didn't rule very long because that limited the number of people that she killed. All right, so she dies, and so there's one child of Henry VIII left, and that's Elizabeth. Okay, the problem is this: the country's become Roman Catholic, but because Elizabeth was born to someone who was not, in the Pope's eyes, actually married to Henry VIII, because in the Pope's eyes, Henry VIII was only married to Catherine of Aragon. Follow so far? That made her child, Elizabeth, illegitimate. And an illegitimate child can't inherit the throne. Did you follow that? So Elizabeth's in a bad place. She really likes the Roman Catholic Church, but if she accepts the Roman Catholic Church, she can't be queen. So she compromises. She said, "Okay, guys, I'll be queen." She says to the nobles, and we'll go this way. I'll be your queen like you want. We'll stay separate from the Roman Catholic Church as long as we can do things in church that are like the Roman Catholic Church. So I really like all the ceremonies. I like all the liturgy. I like all that stuff. They said, "Fine. We'll have the doctrine of the Protestant Church, but we'll carry on in our services as if we're like a Roman Catholic Church." That's called the Elizabethan settlement. All right. So the Church of England is Protestant in doctrine, but kind of acts like, in practice, like the Roman Catholic Church. You follow? Now, when Elizabeth rules a long time, it's under her leadership that colonies start to be established in America, in Jamestown, for example, in Virginia. But when she dies, she doesn't have any children because she's the Virgin Queen, right? She has no children. So when she dies, they have to look for somebody else that's related to be their next king. And so they look at Scotland, because Margaret, the sister of Henry VIII, married James IV, King of Scots, and their and then we have Mary, Queen of Scots, as a grandchild, and she had a son named James. James becomes James VI in Scotland. So you see, he's related through his great-grandmother. So they asked him to come down and be King of England as James I of England, and he consents. And so he comes down. He's head of the Church of England still, just like the others were, but he is trying to kind of retain a Roman Catholicism in the church away, because his mother was strongly Roman Catholic, but he can't offend all the Protestants too. And so to kind of placate them, he says, "Tell you what, we'll come out with a New English translation of the Bible, and so people will have the Word of God in their hands, something for which past people have been executed, right?" So he authorizes a new translation of the Bible in English. It's called the Authorized Version, or you know it as the King James Version, named after him. All right, so he's got the church going, but he doesn't like, he wants everybody to be under the Church of England. He doesn't like the fact that there's some Protestants who say, well, the Roman Catholic Church, it has too much influence in the Church of England. And a lot of things they don't like. We'll talk about specifically what those things are. But that causes difficulty in England, which creates a situation where then settlers leave England and come to America. We'll get to the details of that as we go along. But that's the background, the religious background of what's happening in England. Okay, that's just a quick run through. Hopefully you got the basic idea of what has happened there. Any questions? All right, so there were basically two groups that emerged in opposition to these problems of the Church of England, of its structure and the way it was set up. The two groups that emerged in opposition were called Separatists, because they believed in doing what? Separating. That's why they call them Separatists. Did you get that? They're Separatists because they're separating from the Church of England. They believe they should have separate congregations. They should be able to worship in their own churches apart from the Church of England. Because it was a law that if you didn't go to church even at the Church of England, you could be fined and even in prison for not going to church. How would you like that? You don't go to church Sunday? Okay, you're fine. You have so much money. All right. There was another group of strong Protestants who believed that they could possibly change the church from within. They wanted to purify the church, and they were called Puritans. So these two groups emerged, Separatists and Puritans. And they're going to be the focus of our attention as we look at the people that came to settle Massachusetts. Okay, got it so far? Any questions? All right, first we're going to look at the Separatists. Later they'll be called Pilgrims. They are Separatists, although they didn't call themselves that, but that's what others called them. The leaders of these Separatists came primarily from a place called Scrooby, which is right there in that part of England. Down here's London, up here is Scrooby, northern England, close to Scotland up here. Scrooby was a poor village, but it was located along the roadway from London to Edinburgh, Scotland. And it was also near the legendary Sherwood Forest. Who lived in the Sherwood Forest? Robin Hood, yeah. You know, he probably was a real person who lived much earlier than this, back in the 1200s, I believe. But the people in Scrooby, these Separatists, were influenced by Reformation doctrine, and so many in that area began to pursue worship of God more purely than that was established by the Church of England. So they viewed purification of the Church of England really as something which was unreachable. They said, it's never going to happen. Be realistic. They would say to the Puritans. Now, Puritans and the Separatists, we'll see later, were really in agreement on a lot of things, but they disagreed about this. So they worshiped separately from the established church, and of course were persecuted for their faith. Seeking to follow their faith without restrictions, many of them decided to leave England and go to Holland, which was a center of Protestantism in Europe and also a place that allowed many different kinds of Protestants to worship. So you can see they left Scrooby, came down here to the coast, and went over to Holland or Netherlands. William Bradford, who was a Scrooby separatist, would write later this: they were hunted and persecuted on every side, so as their former afflictions were as flea-bitings in comparison of these which now came upon them. For some were taken and clapped up in prison, others had their house beset and watched night and day. Yet seeing themselves thus molested, and that there was no hope of their continuance there, but a joint consent, they resolved to go into the Low Countries, which is what this area is called, where they heard was freedom of religion for all men. So many of them moved over to the Netherlands or Holland. Well, the problem when they got there was that the skilled jobs that they were able to perform were not available. They couldn't find jobs in their areas, and so the group was very poor. So poverty was an issue. Secondly, the hardships that they were experiencing caused others in England to be reluctant to join. You know, they wanted to get out of England too, but they thought, are we going to go there where they're economically so bad off? That doesn't sound like a good idea either. And there was some local persecution by the Dutch, mostly making fun of them. But some of them were even stoned by local Dutchmen. So it wasn't as free as they anticipated. Many of the group died during the time that they were there in Holland. And one of the things that concerned them as much as anything, maybe the most, was the seduction of their children into the licentiousness of the Dutch. In other words, the Dutch were very free and easy with their living. They did not have the discipline, apparently, to live a godly life, didn't care to. So they were very loose, at least compared to what the Separatists wanted. They could see their children being taken in by that. They also were concerned about losing their national identity. You know, their children were starting to speak Dutch and losing their English, and they didn't want that. They wanted them to maintain knowledge of the English language and of their history. They also had a desire to propagate the gospel. They wanted to be someplace where they could evangelize, preach Christ to people that didn't know him. And in the Netherlands, everyone knew about Christ, and many were followers already. So they decided, in addition, the Dutch were preparing to go to war with Spain. So there's got to be kind of a dangerous situation that way as well. All right, so because of those reasons, they decided that they needed to leave. Okay, the next question is, where? Now where are we going to go? We left England, came to Holland, didn't work out like we planned. Now where? Let's see. Where would be a place they could go to have freedom of religion, they could maintain their English heritage, and they'd have people that they could witness to about the gospel? What part of the world can they go to? What? Americas. Yeah, no, not Spain. No, they would probably be tortured and burned at the stake in Spain. So that's not an option. But even in looking at America, they had two options. They could either go to South America or to Virginia, which was what the English colony was called. So here's what they're looking at. South America or North America, and specifically Virginia. Well, in 1620, they turned down several offers, but decided to accept an offer from a group of London merchants. Remember, merchants got together and formed, what was it called? Joint stock companies to establish colonies or settlements and try to make money off of it. And a delegation of these London merchants asked King James for a charter, which he refused. See, he didn't like these separatists at all. In fact, there have been a number of times when separatists tried to escape England to go to Holland, and they were found out as they were getting ready to get on a ship, or even after they got on, and they were arrested and thrown in jail for trying to leave England. And yet, King James had said that they'd either conform or he would harry them out of England. Okay, well, but you're not letting them go. But that was the situation in which they found themselves. But King James did say this. He promised not to arrest them if they left on their own. Okay, I'm not going to arrest anybody for leaving now. So this was chartered by the Plymouth Company, this attempt. They would be free of all government control. In other words, they would not have the Anglican Church, the Church of England, in control over them. There was the potential for profitable trade as part of a joint stock company. However, the people that were organizing this, these London merchants, called themselves the adventurers. That's kind of a cool name for themselves. However, the adventurers did not provide enough money to purchase all the necessary equipment and food, which required the pilgrims, the separatists, to improvise. It was necessary to, before they left, buy cows and pigs in herds, drive them to market, have them slaughtered, then pickle the meat and pack it in barrels. So they're making their own food to take across on the voyage. All right, as they left Holland, John Robinson was basically their pastor. He stayed behind as the spiritual leader, and he sent William Brewster to lead the group that would go to the New World. And this is a painting of John Robinson with the open Bible, praying for the group, asking God's blessing on them. This painting actually can be found on American Money. So if any of you have any money on you, It's on the back of the $10,000 bill. Anybody have one? At home, Hayden?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So when you get home, look at that. It's on the back. Okay, so in June 1620, they purchased and outfitted a boat called the Speedwell. But this ship proved unseaworthy, so they had to accomplish many repairs. Well, 250 of the group stayed behind, while the rest, about 50, half of them being children, sailed to England, where they were going to be joined by a second vessel called the Mayflower. Now, according to Port London records, this vessel, if it's the same one, because there were a lot of ships named Mayflower, it's very hard to pinpoint exactly which one it was, but apparently this particular vessel was a merchant ship that had been traveling between England and the Baltic ports of Northern Europe on the Baltic Sea, transporting hats, hemp, Spanish salt, hops, vinegar, and Gascon wine to Norway, and coming back with tar, lumber, and herring. So it was not a passenger ship. It was a merchant ship. In England, 70 persons had been recruited by the London merchants to also go to Virginia. So 70 people that were not separatists were also recruited to go along on this venture. Well, when they arrived in England, they found that the Speedwell needed to be repaired again. After much difficulty with the backers over changing the original agreement, requiring the would-be colonists to sell some of their supplies, they had to sell several thousand pounds of butter, some fish hooks, and firearms, and so on, because the adventurers changed the agreement and weren't going to give them as much as they wanted and require more, and it was too late to back out now. So they had to give in and supply more of their own supplies. So they finally departed. However, after they were at sea for several days, the Speedwell proved, according to one writer, to be open and leaky as a sieve. Anybody know what a sieve is? Nobody? People don't know anymore. It's like a colander, a strainer. So if you had a ship that was leaky as a sieve, what's that mean? What's happening? What? It's going to sink because there's water coming in all over the place. So they said, okay, there's something wrong with this ship. Remember, they've already repaired it twice. So they have to go back, and after a couple days out at sea, the two ships turned back and arrived at port just in time. The faulty vessel was once again mended, and in 2 weeks, the two ships proceeded again, August 25th. This time, they went over 300 miles when the Speedwell's captain complained that the ship was so leaky as to put them in danger of sinking. Once again, they returned to England. Doesn't look so good here, does it? And when they couldn't find anything the matter with the ship. So why was the captain complaining? Well, they thought, well, maybe the ship is just generally weak, and so they decided to leave it behind. The difficult decision was made to sell the ship and to combine her passengers with those on the Mayflower. Now, some think that the captain of the Speedwell was anxious to get out of his contract because the contract was not only to take people over there, but to stay there for a year. He possibly had deliberately caused the sail to be put in such a way as to make the seams work loose. Because in later years, the Speedwell didn't seem to have any problems at all. It sailed for years and years after that, no problem. So it kind of looks like the captain sabotaged the whole thing. So they sell that. Now they've got one ship, the Mayflower, which caused them to have to decrease the number of people that are going over. So you might think, well, what was the point in that? You know, we believe that God's in control of these things. So was God just pulling a Gideon you know, and separating those from the ones that were going over who maybe weren't strong enough to make the voyage or wouldn't have lasted. Because when they decided again to go and who's going to stay behind, there were a number of them said, I've changed my mind, I don't want to go. And so it was good for them not to be along. So they were reduced from a number of 120 down to 102. And they squeezed onto the Mayflower. Now most of the passengers, as you can see in this picture, were on what's called the tween deck, because it's in between the bottom and the top deck. So this is where the passengers were. You know, no beds, no separate rooms, no seating, just 100 people just crammed in to that small space. So women and small children were allowed graciously by the captain, Captain Jones, to have the captain's cabin while he bunked with his petty officers. So he allowed some of them to have his cabin, which I think is up here. And then he went to one of those two places with the other officers. A few of the passengers even slept in the Shallow, which was a surveying boat that was stowed on the gun deck. So there must have been one that was right side up, and some of them even slept in that. But most of them packed in below. And here's where all the supplies are down on the bottom. In that tween deck, there was only 5 feet of headroom. So how many of you could not stand up? All of you could not stand up. Now, how would you like to be in that kind of situation for several months, where you can never stand up straight? Not good. Well, we're going to find even worse. And you've learned about this before in Mr. Lane's class. The average living space was smaller than the mattress of a modern twin bed. So your actual living space for each individual was very small. Let's see if we can. Yeah, we have enough time maybe to try to see how much living space there was. Do that. So I worked out that the Mayflower area in which the people lived would be about the same amount of room as from the front, from that wall of my room back to around where my desk is. So we have, what was it, 20, no, we have 19 here, right? Is that right, 19? Yeah, so we'll round up to 20. So 20 into, let's say 100 to round that off is what? 100 divided by 20 is what? 5. So that means that we have to decrease this to about a fifth of the amount of space that's here in order to figure out how much space we would actually have. So a fifth, let's see, 1, 2, no, that's too much. 2. Okay, I think it looks like it'd be about the same size as this first bookcase, as for living and others, over to here. So I want everybody to leave your desks and to get in that space. No further than the bookcase, into the bookcase. Now we don't have to stand in the same spot. Spread out. Okay. How would you like that closeness for a couple months?
I'd be down.
Be nice to be around people?
Depends on how funny it is.
I don't think people like
Yeah, okay. Sophia said she likes being close to people. Let me add that no one takes a bath or even changes your clothes. And you're also taking care of your business also. in this area, you got pots that you go in and every once in a while you can go up on deck and throw them overboard. But if it's a storm, you might. Of course, listen, during a storm, the pots are gonna tip over sometimes, and so, you've got your, it becomes, ongoing. So, how are you gonna sleep? Not much room to sleep. And cook your meals and all that. All right, so, get an idea maybe how proud I was. Okay, go back to your seats. Tomorrow, we will talk about what they took with them. First, we're going to see if you can think of what you would take if you were going on this journey. So you might think ahead and see what in the 1600s you would take with you. Any questions?
A few matches.
Can you be quiet for a moment? Does anyone have any questions?